Following is a conversation with Dr. Chris Damman, gastroenterologist and academic researcher that's focused on nutrition, the microbiome, and gut health more generally. Chris speaks extremely well and very enthusiastically about the importance of gut health. He is a great communicator. He's also published many interesting blog posts on his blog Gut Bites. And really, he's been involved in the microbiome space ever since the first fecal transplants were being performed in America. So he's got a lot of incredible and amazing experience. He also has got experience working with industry, whether it's startup, biotechnology companies working on prebiotics, through to the Gates Foundation, and also some other industry efforts. He's got a broad range of experience, which means he knows tons about all the various different approaches to modulate the microbiome. We spoke a lot about where the unmet medical needs are, the importance of nutrition, the importance of sleep, and other aspects to maintain your gut health. We also spoke about what the future could look like, about novel approaches, including those that build on the evidence for fecal microbiota transplantation. Interestingly, we touched on the GLP-1 agonists and various different approaches to weight loss, which he described as wonder drugs. And to be honest with you, I agree. So there's really something in this episode for everybody. And as I mentioned, Chris is a really excellent communicator. We laughed loads in this podcast episode. And I think all the listeners are going to get some great learnings from this one. So thank you, Chris. Tell us a little bit more about something I've heard you describe as next generation nutrition.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it comes by many monikers. So next generation or, phase 3 or what have you. But it's this idea, it's taking a very pragmatic approach to nutrition. And we've been hearing for a long, long time now with very little gain and improvement to eat whole foods, and we certainly should. And that should be the primary message. How can we find some more creative ways to eat whole foods and ways that are convenient and cost effective? And there's certainly great solutions there. But as a pragmatist, recognizing we all do have our preferences, our crutches, our vices, so to speak, how can we make some of those foods, the ones that we often will find delicious or convenient, more accessible and healthier? And that really is one of the common themes to a lot of the research that I've been doing, a lot of the work that's aimed at a pragmatic approach to nutrition and really finding simple ways to bring these really complex ideas home.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because when something's next generation, we think it's very novel and very new, but actually the concept of food being a medicine, so to speak, is kind of ancient. The ancient the ancient Greek philosophers are talking about let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. So it's amazing. It's come all the way back now, full circle.
100%. And some would say that that quote, which is often attributed to Hippocrates, is apocryphal, right? Like it's exactly maybe not him that said that, but hey, I think we should give him some credit nonetheless. And he had some wonderful ideas, and after all, is the founder of modern medicine.
Yes.
And it is super interesting how this idea of coming full circle is really, in many ways, a metaphor for any journey, where the best travel is you end up back home, hopefully.
Yes.
But you end up back home more enriched for having taken that journey. And that's what research is.
I love that.
In large part. It basically shines the light back on very simple principles of, I think Michael Pollan says it well in his book, and that is eat food, mostly plants, not too much. But there's certainly a lot of
I like that.
seeing color behind those very simple words.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did you get to where you are today then? Give us a little snippet of your career history, because you seem to have done tons. And what's interesting is you've been kind of at various different interfaces, industry, early stage companies, Gates Foundation. There's probably tons to learn there for the listener. It'd be great to hear.
Absolutely. So, I've always had a curious mind, I guess, and I can trace my interest in the microbiome, perhaps even before there was really a commonly used name for it. I think the term had been coined, but it wasn't in common parlance. And it was a medical school lecture that I had back at Columbia. And I remember the professor recommending a book, which has kind of a curious name. It's Plague Times by Paul Ewald. But the book's premise is that a lot of our modern disease is so-called non-communicable disease. And that would be things like cancer and diabetes, metabolic disease, neurological disease, which is believed not to be infectious in nature, may actually still have microbial underpinnings. And it doesn't fulfill the standard Koch's postulates of isolate the organism and then give it back and then cause a disease. But nonetheless, there are these microbial communities that either in health or disease are contributing to our overall well-being. So that's been an idea that I've really ridden throughout my career, and you know, virtually every patient that I saw through internship and residency and fellowship, there was this sort of
Something else going on.
lens going on in the background, like, I wonder what's happening here. All the way through to research and Gates Foundation, and some of the time I spent in working with early food companies.
Yeah. So before the term microbiome was widely used,
Mm.
what was kind of known about it if you cast your mind back then? Were people talking about it? Was it something that people thought was important? Because it obviously predates when I got interested in it. So I'm quite curious. What what did we know?
Yeah, I mean, it it was a little bit avant-garde, and there 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 were well-known examples of how bacteria and viruses had um, basically been discovered as causes of diseases that were never thought to be infectious. And so there are great examples of viral causes of certain types of cancer, like leukemias, but also bacterial causes of cancers like stomach cancer. Barry Marshall and the story from Australia. But there wasn't really, I think, much discussion around how these microbial communities were contributing to
Yes.
either disease or health. That was, I think, still very much being formed at the time. And when microbiome became more in vogue, it was kind of a natural transition to start thinking in those terms and not just as single organisms being the cause of
Gotcha.
these diseases.
That makes total sense. And was there like a watershed moment for you, a paper or seeing a patient that really made you think, okay, I want to really hone in now and
Mm,
go deeper in this area?
mm, yeah. Well, certainly reading Paul Ewald's book Plague Times, trying to think beyond that. I mean, certainly also the research that I did through residency and fellowship.
Mhm.
So one of my major interests was how we could uh, use microbial transplantation or FMT, fecal microbial transplantation, to treat gastrointestinal disease. And
Yeah.
um, this was when it was still being used somewhat roguely for Clostridium difficile,
Yeah.
but these hadn't started yet. Um, and it was still somewhat fringe. And I actually remember giving a lecture to the fellowship program, the GI fellowship program, on how FMT was going to be the future, and micro
Wow.
is going to be a really big topic moving forward. And we might even look back on microbiome like we look back on Koch and Pasteur and these luminaries
Wow.
within the infectious disease world that established the infectious etiology of diseases. Um, and it kind of fell flat. That's a
Yeah.
lot of because like
Yeah.
people like, "Are you serious?" Like giving a bunch of poop in a bottle back to somebody who's going to cure their disease. Like, yeah. So
Oh,
that's a watershed moment, but it certainly was impressive.
an important moment, yeah. And the thing is, you stand up at a conference now, and everyone's like, "Yeah, of course."
Yeah.
You speak to your taxi driver. Of
Yeah.
course, we've know about FMT. I would take an FMT, is what they say. So it's amazing how things change. What about the Gates Foundation then? Because it sounds like there was some impactful work there. And what were you focused on, and what are you most proud of in terms of outcomes? And
Yeah. Absolutely.
how did
So
that?
it was a busy 5 years that I spent at the foundation, and lots of research throughout the whole spectrum. Very early bench work type work, all the way up to phase 2 clinical trials. And the major issue or problem that we're trying to solve is malnutrition, and that comes in different forms. So stunting and wasting, but also in the context of pregnancy and preterm birth and small for gestational age. Um, and what we were doing is essentially taking the lens of the gut and the microbiome to a field that had traditionally been approached with just, well, we need to give more protein and fat and carbohydrate, vitamins and minerals. Um, and that's certainly true. There's deficits in a lot of these things, but what was missing in the approaches was, how do we give these other factors beyond the standard, what are called macro micronutrients, to impart health? And what was super interesting is this realization that, gosh, there's actually common denominators to the malnutrition that's experienced in low and middle income countries in Africa and Asia, where we're focusing our efforts, and the silent malnutrition that we're all experiencing. Uh,
Yes,
it's
that's
not,
definitely a concept. Yeah, that's a concept I'd love to explore further. So just maybe unpack that one a little bit, because I think it wouldn't be something that most people think about when they hear malnutrition. But
yeah.
think yeah, go for
So
it.
we again, there's probably certain to a certain degree deficits in micronutrients. Like potassium is a big one. We don't get enough potassium. And people don't really think much about potassium, but it's as big a deficit as fiber. Um, and probably some other micronutrients like, maybe magnesium and selenium. Um, but um, what we're recognizing is there's also a deficit in factors that are important indirectly for our health. So they're not feeding our cells, but they're rather feeding the microbiome. There are these other juicy factors in our diet that have largely gone missing, that have been processed out, and that would be fibers, but also polyphenols, which are the compounds in plants that often will give them their vibrant colors, the whole spectrum of the rainbow. Um, but turn out to be antioxidants, turn out to be transformed by the microbiome, just like fiber is, into factors that are then absorbable into the body and impact our cells profoundly in many ways. But one really important way is through regulating our mitochondria and turning them on and off at the level of DNA, at the level of epigenetics.
You just mentioned a couple of interesting things there, and it ties into something I've seen you post about a lot, which is the four Fs:
Mm.
the fibers, polyphenols, healthy fats, and ferments. So I
Mhm.
think this is maybe a construct that you came up with.
It
Um,
it
you
it
can talk
is.
about it a little bit more.
There might be other Fs out there in the food world, but and admittedly, one of them is a bit of a cheat because it's a phonetic F, the polyphenols. But these are some of the major factors that are currently missing in our diet, and that are common denominators in healthy diets around the world. Pretty interestingly, so there's the so-called blue zones, these areas in the world where people disproportionately live to 100 plus years old, and live in relatively good health to those ages. And there's probably a lot of factors. It's certainly not just diet. There's also the 4 M's that we could talk about, but um, diet is really important. And if you look across those cultures as to are the common denominators in the diet, you can do it at the level of things like, okay, well, they all have beans, they all have fermented foods, they all have, you know, largely plant-based diets, so not entirely things like that. But you can also go one level deeper, and realize, well, beyond the macro micronutrients, um, they also have these 4 Fs in spades,
Yeah.
that we are missing. And so that right there is, I think, a really important element of, how we can solve our nutrition crisis, because it gives us a target, for what needs to be reincorporated back into food. Certainly whole foods, but can we make the processed foods incrementally better in a practical approach by adding some of these things back?
And if you were to kind of bet your house on of all of the possible things that makes people live long and live healthy, how much would you bet on the 4 Fs being top of the list? Or is there something else? You mentioned the 4 Ms, I'd love to learn more about as well. But how important is this? And how much of a benefit can people get from upping the 4 Fs, in
Yeah,
your opinion?
it's a great question. So I guess we could start with the question of what percent of modern disease that we experience, the non-communicable diseases, the cancers and the metabolic disease, neurological disease, is due to diet. And some estimates put it at 50% or higher. So that says right there that nutrition
Well,
is super important. Now, how important are the 4 Fs, to contributing to these diseases? I think what puts things into perspective is, um, if we weren't getting enough protein or, fat or carbohydrates, these would be the things that are most important, and that are contributing in their absence to our disease. But what puts things like the 4 Fs on a pedestal is the fact that they're deficits in our diet, and that's what's highlighting their importance, is they're missing.
gotcha.
Um, and and so because they're missing and because they're disproportionately contributing to disease,
Right.
I couldn't hazard a specific percentage guess, but it's high. You know, if you say food is 50%, where do these fall? I don't know. But it's
Gotcha.
high. Yeah. It's a big,
And if we I mean, it seems huge. It seems absolutely huge. And maybe we could just have the other discussion, which is the reason we're so sick because of lack of 4Fs plus maybe the ultra processed side of things with the emulsifiers and seed oils and, the industrial gloop that you can see on your sandwich packet if you buy it from petrol station or whatever. So how damaging are these ultra processed foods in your opinion?
yeah, absolutely. So there is a strict definition of what an ultra processed food is, and it basically throws all these ultra processed foods into a single category,
Mm.
uh, rather than, being able to separate them out and say, well, this one is maybe healthier for you than another. And I think that's a really important, task to be able to do, because that helps us with a practical solution moving forward. So say that first. But, um, what is it about these ultra processed foods,
Yeah.
that makes them unhealthy? And there's lots of, hypotheses and theories and even data to support those theories. And one of them is a theory that was championed by Michael Moss, in his, book of similar name, Salt, Sugar, Fat. And that is, we're getting way too much of these nutrients. And I think that's part of the equation. That's important. But if that were everything, we would have solved the problem already. So it's clearly not.
Yeah.
Um, the the thing I would add to salt, sugar, and fat is what you mentioned, emulsifiers and additives, and those are probably
Yep.
also contributing to a certain degree as well.
Colors and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
all,
we done.
all that stuff.
How much they're
To be honest with you,
contributing relative, yeah, to
yeah,
other
I
things.
actually, I'm stunned by your stat there. 50% of all of these non-communicable diseases have a very strong link to diet.
Yeah.
Is it could you go as far, if I could just push you a little bit further, is it causative or is it more just correlative at this stage? How far will you go?
The 50% we can't say is causative because that's based on epidemiological studies, so it's correlative. But there are, certainly animal model studies and even interventional human studies that take it that next step, and certain elements are in fact causative. So there's plenty of fiber intervention studies showing that improves blood sugar levels and improves weight. There's Kellen Hall's brilliant study looking at whole foods versus processed foods, showing the difference in weight gain over very short periods of time. And there's a number of impactful studies that show it's not just correlation, but to say that all 50% we could intervene and erase it, that would be maybe too much of a stretch. Then it's a good point that
Yeah, but it's pretty exciting because if across the whole population, across all of those diseases, 1 in 2 of them could really benefit from significant intervention on diet, whether it's through a different type of food or it's through some of the other things that you've been working on, this next generation nutrition, then there's another therapeutic avenue there, right? Because we're just trying to give people drugs. But are we addressing the root cause through these drugs, or do we address the root cause through nutrition, in your opinion?
medicine has always been great at treating a problem once it's there. That is its strength, and it should continue to do that. But we shouldn't let that become a crutch and turn a blind eye to how we can prevent those conditions from happening in the first place and live to 100 plus years with minimal disease. And so I think if we want to focus not just on quantity of life, but quality of life, then prevention becomes really, really important, underscored. Now, we've always dreamed for that panacea, that magic bullet. And it goes all the way back to Ehrlich, right? And the magic bullets for treating infectious disease. And silver was one of the major things he found.
Literal magic bullet. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about werewolves and how that lore all came to be, but that was well before Ehrlich. Uh, But we've been yearning for this magic bullet, and that's one side of the spectrum of treatment and prevention. The other spectrum is what I call the healthy lifestyle slog, right? The thing we preach, but is very difficult to achieve. We all
I
get our
like it.
memberships,
It's a slog.
yeah, around your years, but then how many of us continue going to the gym come March? But there is this sort of space in between the two where I think there is a sweet spot, so to speak, where we can achieve kind of convenience and incremental healthier approaches to our diet. And that's really been kind of the focus of the research that I've been working on.
Yeah, I think, as you said, silver bullet, magic bullet, I immediately thought we have to now talk about GLP-1s.
Okay.
Because you've done a lot of interesting work on sort of boosting or modulating GLP-1 through fibers and diet and so on. And now we've got these drugs where you're injecting it. So I'll just ask you a really open question. What are your thinking? What is your thinking in your thesis on these GLP-1 agonists? So
I think GLP-1s come as close to a magic bullet as we could have ever dreamed for treating not just diabetes, but as it turns out, overweight and obesity. And by the way, not just overweight and obesity, but addiction, alcohol and drugs. And by the way, may actually help prevent against hospitalizations with COVID, and may help prevent development of Alzheimer's, and on and on. It's really incredible. But you asked about root cause, and I think what GLP-1 is doing is getting at something close to a root cause, and that's why there's so many beneficial effects. And the root cause ultimately to a lot of these diseases, metabolic or otherwise, is metabolic. And eating too much and not being able to process those foods in the right way because we're missing things. We're missing the instructions that come with the calories. GLP-1 provides some of that instruction. GLP-1 regulates our appetite. GLP-1 regulates our metabolism in really profound ways. And GLP-1 is replacing something that may be dysregulated to a certain degree in our natural bodies because it's GLP-1 produced by the gut. And actually, as it turns out, there's some produced in the brain as well. That's stimulated by things like the transformed products of fiber into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and the transformed products of polyphenols. Certainly not the only thing. Some of the macro micronutrients can also stimulate it. But those are major stimulators, especially when it comes to production of GLP-1 down in the colon. These are the leftovers from our food that filter their way down and feed the microbiome, and then the microbiome creates these factors. So what's super interesting with the GLP-1 story is in more ways than one, it's shining a light back on the root cause. So I actually have hope that it's not just going to become a societal crutch. Like, it's solving a really big problem with disease that we have right now here. Like you, me, family, friends, we're all struggling. And many of us have already collected a laundry list of medical conditions that we can't seem to shake. And GLP-1 is doing a pretty good job with helping with that. But it's not perfect. We know there's side effects. And those side effects, for some, can be quite crippling. Side effects are largely, although not completely, GI in nature. And it may be no coincidence that our appetite is down, we're losing weight because we're just not moving food through our bellies as easily. The stomach slows down a little bit. It can contribute to constipation. It can actually contribute to diarrhea as well. It can cause nausea. And so when our GI tract is lethargic, so too is our appetite. But beyond just diarrhea and constipation and nausea and vomiting, there are more rare associated likely side effects of pancreatitis and gastroparesis, conditions that are less reversible. So it doesn't come without its collateral damage or side effects. And I think for that reason, for the reason of cost, it's incredibly costly. And the fact you have to be on these drugs really indefinitely. So if you start them as, a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, or even, thinking about this for kiddos, right? Just like bariatric surgery is approved approach to pediatric obesity. Then you're thinking about really lifelong being on these medications. So for a lot of reasons, how GLP-1 drugs are shining a light back on these really fundamental metabolic pathways and what stimulates them naturally, and how these things that have been removed from our diets to processing actually translated by the microbiome stimulate those same factors, not at the super physiological levels that they're being given. So, you don't, the nausea and vomiting, the weight loss isn't quite as profound, but nonetheless, it's real and it's incremental and it's ideally sustainable if we can find ways of getting these things back into our general food stream.
So is it fair to say then that your vision for the future is the GLP-1 super physiological doses will stay, and maybe we have other hormones in there as well, but there's maybe a more gradual but better tolerated approach where we leverage the hidden microbial majority and essentially stimulate them to produce GLP-1? Or is it a molecular mimic, or is it truly GLP-1 that they're producing? Do we know how that's working mechanistically?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the original GLP-1, and the GLP-1s that we see in drugs, those are the mimics. But the original GLP-1 is produced by the gut, and it's not directly produced by microbiome. The microbiome makes factors that then stimulate the lining of the gut, very specific cells that in turn produce not just GLP-1, but other gut hormones as well. So GIP is one of those. It's actually part of a different drug. The two come together. And PYY is another as well. So these are all called increasing hormones, and they're naturally produced by our gut, by our colon and the upper gut.
So essentially, we're just hacking the gut to deliver these profound benefits. That's the essence of it.
I think hack
We've
is
somehow.
it's a good use of. I'll say one more thing that's kind of in a positive light. People's appetites and eating habits are changing as a result of GLP-1, and the food industry is actually responding to changing buying habits, and it's quite profound, right? It's hitting the food companies' pocketbooks in a major way. People are eating less, and they're eating less of the less healthy foods, and for whatever reason, are shifting towards the healthier ones. And so that's actually creating an impetus or a stimulus for food companies to create better products. And the hope would be that actually filters down to the entirety of society, not people that are on GLP-1 drugs only, but everyone. It's kind of like, power steering in automobile vehicles back in, the 60s or 70s. And it was a luxury item at first, but then it became available for everyone. And that's kind of what my vision is for change. Ultimately, is you have these more premium products. Yes, maybe they're a little bit more expensive initially, but with time, with demands, and with increased availability, the cost would come down. And ideally, it would be available for the majority of people.
It's really interesting. Like, a couple of people have come on the podcast and they've said things like, it's really difficult to get somebody to start a diet which is more enriched in the 4Fs. But once they've started, they kind of eventually don't want to have what they had before. They kind of go off it a little bit, and it becomes much easier and more sustainable to eat really healthily. So is there something there, with these GLP-1s? Is it people go off the sugar, salt, and fat because they know something within their hormones is saying this is not good for me? Or is it to do with the dopamine reward system? Or is their microbiome changing and the microbiome saying, I want more of these healthy foods? Have we got any insights into how that's actually working?
These are all wonderful hypotheses. And as you're speaking, it brings me back to, well, what is the definition of ultra-processed food? And there's a very similar term called hyperpalatable food. These are foods which have specific combinations of salt, sugar, fats that are believed to be actually truly tapping into our reward system and addiction. And so there might be some analogies here between what happens with addiction, where you're in the throes of alcoholism or whatever drug you may be addicted to. You don't realize just how dysfunctional and how awful you feel. What you do know is that you have to keep taking in that drug in order to feel good, and it becomes this vicious cycle. And so,
Or to feel normal.
to feel normal, feel normal. Not good is maybe the wrong word. And there may be some analogies, and there's actually good research to support this sort of addictive nature of a lot of the ultra processed foods that we're eating, the so-called hyperpalatable foods that are tapping into these reward systems. So if you can short circuit that, and it takes some time because you will have those cravings for a certain amount of time after stopping. But if you short circuit that and you start replacing it with wholesome foods, the experience is that people's cravings for these foods and high sugar, high fat foods actually dissipate over time, to the point where they look back on those days and they're like, gosh, I actually really did feel crappy. And I was in this downward spiral and never want to go back there.
Yeah, this is it. If we could just get people to eat brilliantly for 3 months, people would feel good and they would say, I want to feel like this forever. I think maybe the GLP-1s are kickstarting people and allowing them to just through the super physiological dose of hormones to get to that point.
Mm.
And it's so fascinating to hear you say that the food companies are having to adapt.
Mhm.
So, the sugary things are now less popular and people want, but it's great.
Yeah,
That's
no, it's a
good.
good thing. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm an optimist. I'm a glass half full type person. I like to see the positive and everything. And okay, yeah, there's a lot of naysayers with GLP-1, and yeah, there's side effects and all these bad things. But I do think that the ultimate outcome of all this is going to be positive. And we may have some dips here and there, but yeah, the ultimate trajectory will be a positive one.
And if you had the sort of crystal ball and you were looking to the future, how do you think all of this is going to shape out with the glass half full lens? 'Cause I think that's nice. I'm also a glass half full kind of guy. I think most entrepreneurs are, aren't they? Um, how is the world going to look? Do you think in 10 years' time when these GLP-1s are more ubiquitous? Is healthy food going to be everywhere? You know, can you try and predict based on how you see things moving and shaping where we'll
Yeah,
be?
yeah. So I think that companies will continue to put out increasing amounts of healthier products, and healthier products are as much adding these factors back in as it is clean label, right? And that sort of speaks to keeping some of those additives out and rebalancing the things that are too concentrated with the things that are missing. Um, and what will be tricky, I believe, for consumers is separating out the truly functional, better for you foods from the snake oils, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of claims that are being made, and truthfully, the better for you products are often more expensive because currently these things that are being put back in are more expensive ingredients. So it's very tempting to provide a product that makes similar claims with placebo amounts of these factors. Or you
Yeah.
can say they're there, but they're not in any functional way. So, how the heck does a consumer tell the difference? And I think that's
Right.
where these so-called nutrient profiling systems that are already available in Europe and Australia and New Zealand,
Yeah.
England, are going to come into play.
Have you not
And
built one? You've built something like this, have you not?
there are
Yeah.
some very good systems out there currently, like Nutri-Score and HealthStar, and there's also one that was developed out of Tufts recently. And I think they're all directionally pointing in a good way. And what they're doing currently is separating out the unprocessed foods from the more processed ones. And the processed ones are all kind of being largely lumped together. Um, so they're falling flat and doing a good job at really separating out all those processed foods. That's, I think, where there could be some incremental improvement, and that's really where a lot of my research has been focused. Is how do we do that? I think ratios where we don't vilify some ingredients like the salt, sugar, and fat, and we don't put up on a pedestal other ingredients like the four Fs and protein and potassium, but rather we think about how we can rebalance them. And that's what ratios do. It's about balance. And so I've created this other nutrient profiling system that's largely based in ratios. There's also correction factors for microbiome. Um, and when you compare that score's not prediction, but association with health outcomes like waist circumference and blood pressure and BMI and overweight, it actually does really well. And it separates out that middle. And you start looking at p values with 4 zeros in front of the
Wow.
number as opposed to one.
Yeah.
And graphs that look like a beautiful step as opposed to giant leap up
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
the end. And so I'm super excited. So this is currently in peer review. It's a paper that you could find on my website, or it's also in a preprint server. And my passion, as I was saying, is it's not just about learning, but it's and for learning's sake, but it's learning with practical application, with impact. Like, how can we bring these ideas directly to people so they can benefit now. So the Gut Bites blog is all about that, consolidating information in a digestible way, but not watered down way. But the other passion I've had is developing this smart technology app on a phone that allows you to even now take that algorithm, do a quick scan of a product in a grocery market, look and see, oh, well, that scores a 50. So not the best score. But oh my gosh, 10 other items that are right here on the shelf that I could get instead.
I love that.
Yeah, it's called the Smart Bites app, and the list is
Yeah,
the
I had a,
standard makes
I
this.
had a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a
So
look before the call. So is there 100% scoring ratio? Like, is there an optimal in all of this? And if so, what is that?
so I think going back to the idea of balance and counterbalance,
Right.
I am a very strong advocate of not avoiding the red foods. Uh, you know, amongst the red foods would be things like butter and sugar and things that are traditionally considered wholesome and part of grandma's chocolate chip cookies. And we existed with grandma's chocolate cookies.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm thinking of my granny's cheesecake. So good. That's the best.
yeah,
It's the best.
yeah. So
Hands down.
it's
Hands
not
down all
about
day.
avoiding those foods. And this is, again, about how you can take a practical approach. It's really about moderating those foods. So maybe eating a little bit less amount, less frequent, and most importantly, how do you balance those foods to ultimately achieve a score, ideally in kind of the 70 to 80 range? You wouldn't want to go all the way to 90 to 100 because you just waste away. Uh, and you probably, if you're an otherwise pretty healthy person, exist in a high 60 to 70 range and do okay,
Yeah.
and not
Okay.
gain or lose weight. But for the
Gotcha.
majority of us, we'd probably want to be in that 70 to 80 range in order to reestablish our metabolic health and sustain it for long periods of time. So what does this mean practically? Like, it's kind of silly, but when you're making brownies next time, think about either mashing up some sweet potatoes and throwing that in, or mashing up black beans. You won't even notice the difference. They're the same consistency. They're actually, both somewhat a little bit sweet, and it'll impart tons of fiber.
Yeah.
And that fiber is good not just to help you have a good bowel movement, but it slows the absorption of the sugar in the brownie so that your blood sugar spikes less. And it makes its way down to the colon, produces butyrate, and then that regulates how that sugar is processed, not just in the meal you had, but in the second meal and the third meal.
Beautiful.
So there's simple hacks, you could call them, like this, that the calculator kind of intuitively helps you figure out. And that's just one of many different possibilities.
And one of the questions that we get all the time from listeners is, what is the best diet for my microbiome? Is there an easy, clear-cut answer to that, or is it more nuanced and sort of personalized? And maybe people need to use the tools that you're developing to get there.
Yeah. If we're talking in terms of a population, there are clear answers. If we're talking in terms of an individual, then I think personalization is actually important. And the reason is, the majority of us can probably increase our fiber, and with a little bit of equilibration time, allowing for all of those hydrogen consumers to eat all the extra gas that's being produced by the primary consumers that are feeding on the fiber, the so-called secondary consumers, your GI tract will equilibrate and you'll be just fine. But there are some people, and it's a pretty significant portion of our population now, probably because we've been eating imperfect diets and developing dysbiotic microbiomes for some time now. It doesn't matter whether they go back on a healthy diet or not, it may actually stir things up and make things worse. And these are folks that have irritable bowel syndrome or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or even inflammatory bowel disease. So my advice to people is talk with your doctor.
No, we wanted the silver bullet.
So
Come on.
if you experience these GI side effects as you're increasing fiber, then you should go chat with your doctor and make sure these other things aren't happening.
Yeah, gotcha. I like what you're saying about equilibrium. So, is it fair to say that if someone isn't eating much in the way of fiber and they then add a load of fiber in, they take all the advice, they read the books, they listen to this podcast, they feel gassy, they feel bloated, you know, um, maybe there's a bit of abdominal pain sometimes, their bowel habits change. Is your expert advice just ride it out for a couple of weeks, see what happens? It should subside. Is that fair or?
I think in some people, yes, and perhaps more so if you're like really eating whole food diets. But even among that, there's very obvious examples of disease like celiac disease, where you wouldn't want to ride out eating things with gluten in them and wheat, because it's really going to cause more significant damage. Now, the other thing that I often will ask people to look at, and one of the major culprits to GI side effects, not ones like celiac disease, but more sort of in the realm of irritable bowel syndrome, are the FODMAP fibers. These are fibers that disproportionately contribute to symptoms, GI symptoms in people. And one of the major culprits in the FODMAP category are fructooligosaccharides, which come under many different names. So that's the F in FODMAPs. Inulin is one of the names. Garlic powder is another name. Onion powder, agave syrup, chicory root. These are all code names for inulin. And inulin is super interesting because if you look at animal studies and even human studies, it's actually been shown to be beneficial, and it grows bifidobacterium, and bifidobacterium produces acetate and lactate that then go on to allow secondary consumers to make butyrate. So in some people, it can be beneficial. Now, there are other people who either have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or irritable bowel syndrome, where inulin is the worst thing you could do, because you have bugs in the wrong place and you have the wrong types of bugs, and they're consuming these fibers under many different names, and making you feel crummy, making you feel bloated, causing loose stools, even brain fog. So that's one of the major culprits. And if you look at processed foods, these are in everything. And the reason they're in everything is it's a fiber that's really easy to formulate. It's soluble, so you can throw it in anything. It's not like the psyllium husk that's in Metamucil. It just turns to goop. It goes straight into the solution. And oh, by the way, it's actually kind of sweet too. So it's the experience of the food, the so-called organoleptic properties of the food. And garlic and onion. Who doesn't like garlic and onion? It imparts flavor. But in a certain segment of the population, and it's not insignificant, these are actually fueling GI symptoms.
So what does somebody do then if they're one of those people who doesn't react well to the fructooligosaccharides?
Well, the obvious solution is to avoid them, but that's difficult. That's not terribly practical from a social standpoint. These foods are everything when you go out to eat. When you go to a restaurant, you can't read a label, so you don't know whether it's there or not. And so, the obvious thing is, okay, well, read labels and avoid it when you cook at home. And, when you go out to eat, learn the foods that you can eat and stick to those. And if a friend says we should go get some food, say, well, I've got a great restaurant in mind because, there's things that you could eat there. But I think the underlying question is there anything that you can do to still allow you to eat those foods? And there is some limited research suggesting, well, what if you flood your gut with other fibers that are beneficial and that your gut likes? And so that there's limited research here, but that's one strategy that you could experiment with and see if that helps. And there's research that shows that psyllium husk actually helps ameliorate IBS. It's one of the fibers, and in many people that's better tolerated. Not everyone, and that's where personalized medicine is important. You have to listen to your body. Like if you find Metamucil is not good for you, then don't do it.
Yep.
Right? Because it's your body and or your microbes talking to you. But yeah, adding a flood of fiber at the same time that you're having that meal, so sprinkling fiber on or taking a fiber slurry with that meal, it's possible that. And there's, also products that are coming down the market, enzymes. So just like you would take a lactase if you're lactose intolerant, which is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. And there's Beano, which actually is for breaking down the fibers in bean. It's also an enzyme, and that allows you to tolerate eating beans. But neither of those enzymes are targeted to inulin.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So there is a product or two out there now that is targeted to inulin. I don't know how much research there is that
Interesting.
supports its efficacy, but it's interesting and maybe worth trying for those that want to experiment with their N of 1.
Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful segue into microbiome therapeutics and supplements. So are you able to talk the listener through where you see the landscape at the moment and what you're most excited about in terms of the future for microbial therapies or postbiotics, any modality? What's getting you most excited?
So I think of microbiome targeted therapies in terms of growing a garden. And if you use an analogy of a garden or a lawn, there's weed, seed, and feed. So we've been existing in the realm of weed, which is antibiotics, for a long, long time. You have a problem with bugs and you get rid of them. The problem is you get rid of good bugs too when you do that, and then the bad bugs come back with a vengeance. So that's not a perfect solution for our microbiomes. Certainly good if you have specific infectious disease that needs treatment. That's weed. Then there's there's seed, and seed is the probiotic approach. And we can go to a pharmacy or a supermarket and our eyes gloss over with the options both on the dry shelf and in the refrigerator of all the different probiotics, which often actually are not what are advertised. If you end up doing sequencing, they're the bugs that are there are not the ones that they. It's not a highly regulated segment of supplementation.
Chris, sorry, do you mind if I just say something for the European UK listener? In America, it's like on another level. I've been many times, and it's almost a bit comical because I think the way the probiotics and supplement companies try and position themselves is we have the largest number of CFUs. Not necessarily the right strain or even the species. Sometimes they don't even say what's in it because, just for a bit of fun, I always have a look in, these huge mega supermarkets. The crazy thing, as you say, is, people have done work trying to culture up. And actually, they're finding completely different bugs. So not only are they not stable for the most part, they're not even the correct bug sometimes. So how does the consumer know?
Yeah. So there are some products that have been studied rigorously in randomized placebo-controlled trials and peer-reviewed literature for very specific conditions, things like pouchitis, which is folks that have had ulcerative colitis and their colon's removed and the little remaining colon that's there, it gets inflamed. Certain products have been shown to actually be efficacious for that. One of the other areas would be post-infectious Clostridium difficile and preventing that. And as it turns out, traveler's diarrhea too. Probiotics may be efficacious according to meta-analysis of many different papers on probiotic supplementation to prevent you from developing Campylobacter E. coli infection when you're traveling in equatorial parts of the world where these diseases are more prevalent. So, if you have a specific condition or want to prevent a specific condition, and if it's being recommended by your healthcare provider, then by all means, it's worth doing. And if you're just looking for something to generally improve gut health or your overall well-being, and want to reach for a product off the market, off the shelf, I generally tell people, well, there's a lot of good bacteria in fermented foods. And a lot of the bacteria that are in these probiotics are coming from those fermented foods.
Yeah.
And, especially artisanal fermented foods, all of those bacteria there in their natural ecosystems and balances and, time-honored, evolutionary-honored relationships with our own bodies and microbes. So I generally tell people to look at fermented foods. And there's actually a really fascinating study out of Stanford by Sonnenberg and colleagues that is one of the first to show fermented foods not only improve the diversity of the gut microbiome, but also decrease inflammation in the body. Yeah, there's some developing evidence around fermented foods that this is not just a drop in the bucket, but helpful, and these probiotics are good. So that's the seed part, and then the weed part. No, the last one is weed seed and feed. Yeah, the feed part.
Yeah, I don't think you've written a book yet. Have you written a book, Chris? Not yet.
I'm working on it.
I was about to say, you need to write a book because I am noting some of these down. I really like it, and I'm gonna start. Previously, I was talking about the 3 Ps: prebiotics, probiotics, polyphenols on this podcast. That was a key theme. 3 Ps. But I'm loving the 4 Fs, and I'm loving the weed, seed, and feed.
Yeah.
So these are going to be recurring themes, and you credit you for that. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's really nice. Really nice.
Yeah.
So
I've worked a little bit with the Washington Post on some of these themes, and have contributed to the conversation in a bunch of articles there. But there's a great article that the Washington Post wrote along these themes of weed, seed, and feed that people can find.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's just people get it. People get it.
Yeah,
it's
it makes
great.
it easy.
I love it. Yeah.
Okay, so my heart really is in the feed, and that's kind of nature's way, it's evolution's way. Like we haven't been going around eating poop. There are animals that practice coprophagia, so FMT is pretty artificial. It's in giving the bugs that are normally in our colon back. That's not the way things normally work. And antibiotics too, in some cases, yes, you probably need to jumpstart and get rid of some of those bad bugs. But where I would start is feeding the good ones. And I actually will often quote Field of Dreams and Kevin Costner. And there's a saying throughout the entire movie of if you build it, they will come. And that's referring to a baseball field and bringing back the spirits of the greats of past baseball teams. And just a slight modification, that is, if you feed them, they will come. And so if you provide the right prebiotics with time, a lot of those microbes are already there in your gut in undetectable amounts, and they'll resurface.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Got you. So they're there, but they're just being kind of crowded out by all the other ones. So if you change the dynamics of what they're being fed by what you're eating, okay, I love that. So are you... Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this harkens back to one of the first studies that I did. at the University of Washington. It was a fecal transplant study. And our primary aim, it was in inflammatory bowel disease and ulcerative colitis. Our primary aim wasn't to treat or cure IBD. It was rather just to show what happens to the microbial populations when you influx a completely foreign one. Like, is there a war that happens, and which one wins out? And what we found is that generally increase the species are associated with health. So this is a sort of time-old tale of good over evil, right? We see it in the movie theaters. It speaks to cooperation. Good generally is a force that's more cooperative, and so too is a healthy microbiome. But what was fascinating is it brought out the best of what was already
It's
there.
amazing.
Yeah,
I love that.
and all those
I
good
really love that.
that were already there resurface. So they're sequences that you're like, gosh, where did that come from? I didn't see that in either sample. Yeah.
It's incredible. Like, when I first started to get interested in the microbiome, almost pre-starting in Therapeutics, a lot of people would say things like, well, FMT seems to be working. We don't really know how it works, and it's going to be superseded by a single strain.
Mm.
But now, some 10 plus years on, 12 years on from the first RCT in the New England Journal of Medicine for C. diff, the narrative's kind of shifted back a little bit to actually, for some patients, you need the full ecosystem. And maybe it's not just adding them back in, it's somehow stimulating the ones that are there in these almost undetectable levels to resurface. So on that theme, what are your thoughts on FMT and its future and its potential use case in all of this, the wheat, seed and feed?
Yeah. So, it's not that different from how I think about GLP-1. Once you have disease entrenched, then it takes, less natural approaches to reestablish equilibrium. It requires some bigger guns. And so that's, if you've got dysbiosis, we might find ultimately that it really requires a full weed seed feed approach. These were lessons that we learned in treating malnutrition in folks with environmental enteric dysfunction, in the Gates Foundation work that we're doing, where the guts were very far gone and required more drastic approaches in order to reestablish equilibrium there. So what's going to happen with FMT? I think it will find its niche, so to speak. And it's found its niche to a certain degree already with C. diff, which is the low-hanging fruit of the gut and the most impoverished of microbial ecosystems that you could possibly imagine in the gut. Where the diversity is just dramatically decreased in C. diff. So it's no wonder that you throw a whiff of stool at C. diff and things improve. But is there going to be a role for FMT in other conditions? Well, maybe in inflammatory bowel disease, ultimately. I think there could be a role there. And there's, certainly signals of efficacy in ulcerative colitis and even Crohn's disease with FMT. Are we going to start seeing FMT for weight loss or neurological conditions? In fact, there are some very early trials with FMT and Alzheimer's and I believe Parkinson's. And maybe, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, some of them I think are only in the realm of animal models, but there are some clinical studies there, just, pilots that have been done and be interesting.
I mean, imagine that. It's all centering around the gut. Change the gut, you somehow change his motor symptoms, you somehow improve cognition. Why not? I mean, the GI symptoms do start quite long before the motor symptoms, don't they, in Parkinson's? I think that's established.
That is true, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen 2 RCTs in Parkinson's with FMT, and it was conflicting in terms of results. So the jury's still out. UC, definitely seen 9 RCTs now.
Yeah.
It's definitely something happening. It's just a case of what. So maybe then, as we've gone past the hours, it's been super fun. it'd be really nice to kind of just close out with, what's next for you on your journey. You've talked very eloquently today about your passion for science communication. You're doing an amazing job with Gut Bites and all of your other platforms. There's also the book that you're talking about. What's next for you, and what's really getting you excited about all of this?
Yeah. I think I'll continue to follow my North Star, and that is, how do we translate these complex ideas into something that's digestible for everyone? And um, so, contributing to write articles, working on the book, getting that published, getting that available for folks. Talks about themes that we've talked about and beyond. Practical solutions and approaches, not just heady academic discussion of gut microbiome and nutrition. But a lot of my thinking right now is actually going towards this smart technology for the phone, and it's slated to be released in a month, and it'll be out there, and you know envision trials around it and improving it. It's kind of its first iteration. Super interested in getting feedback from people. What else do you want to go with this? How can we layer on AI? Um,
Mhm.
and not just as a health coach, which you see on just about every app now, but partnering with the score in order to give you meal plans and better suggestions for how foods pair together. And
Love that.
right now, it's kind of you're plotting it yourself and looking at the scores and finagling. But how cool if you could layer on AI that would say, "Hey, well, gosh,
Yep.
you need to do a carrot with this. You add a carrot, and you're going to be great."
So have you created a company for this to move this forward?
So, it's super interesting. I've been in the entrepreneurial world. So I worked at a food company, and I know the world well. This is just a pet project of mine. This is just something that I'm working on, and I don't know how it's all going to turn out eventually. But the guiding light, and I will say, it's not inexpensive. I'm lucky that I'm able to support myself and support this work with the clinical work that I do. And that allows me to carve out this time and the resources, financially and otherwise, to support the project. My aim is for this to be a public good, but in order for it to be a public good, it has to be self-sustainable, and so there will be some mechanism there, and I'm not exactly sure what that is. But I think the majority of the functionality of the app is going to be freely available, and then there'll be sort of for the more high-end users that wanna sort of track all their meals and wanna see, what, the trajectory of their scores and how that relates to, things like their mood and their sleep.
Is there any way that people in the UK or Europe can help you with this, or is it mainly US
Yeah.
initiative at the moment?
Yeah, so, right now, the API that we're tapping into, and that's just computer language for the database of all the, commercially available and generic foods that it's accessing, is a US database, so it's got all the generic foods, and that's relevant to everyone, and, even the branded foods, there's plenty of crossover, but the barcodes wouldn't
Mm,
necessarily work
gotcha.
in the UK or, Europe. Um, but it could still be useful in the sense of you're entering in, text searches, and there's voice to text, which makes the text searches really easy. You just speak it to the phone. So I think it could still be incredibly valuable in that regard in finding better products, because the better for you lists are linked to that searching as well as the
Makes
scanning
sense.
of UPCs. But that said, with traction, with financial sustainability, the API that I chose does have databases of every relevant country in the world. So it's
Okay,
just going to cost me.
nice.
So there is that possibility. Yeah.
That's great because it's not just a US problem, is it? I mean, maybe it's worse in the US for
Yeah.
some reason. The food quality is worse. Is that a thing? Is it worse over there?
I
Is it?
think a lot of the epidemiological studies do suggest that
Yeah.
the health problem is uh, at its worst. In the US, yeah, for sure. And we can speculate as to why that might be the case, but yeah, the epi does suggest that's so.
Yeah, so maybe start there, build, and find your way over to here, because I can tell you the Scottish staple diet is not one that's particularly microbiome friendly. So there's definitely a need, I think, in other parts of the Western world too.
Yeah, for sure. And in the British Isles, I don't know I imagine it's in Scotland too. The stoplight system, is that
Yep.
something? Yeah. So it's helpful, right? It's incrementally helpful. But I do think that we can do better. And that's been the inspiration behind the NCS, or Nutrient Consume Score, that's powering the app. And yeah, I mean, how cool would it be if this is a system that then gets traction worldwide? And who cares that it's NCS? If we're another system that's even better, great.
Yep.
But if we can get a system that's better, that really gives us all a North Star for how to eat better in a really easy way, I'm all for it. It'd be really cool.
I love that. I think that's a really nice, positive, inspirational note to finish on. I didn't get to all of the things I wanted to discuss with you. I was keen to speak about AI. I was keen to speak about antimicrobial resistance, IBS, SIBO, how to use nutrition to maybe treat disease. But we've covered a huge amount, and you're definitely one of the most gifted and eloquent speakers that we've had on about all things nutrition and microbiome. You're just able to break down these concepts into really simple, easy to understand language that's applicable to everybody. So kudos to you. And to be honest, you'd be an amazing podcast host as well. So I'm not sure if you've thought about doing that, but it should be on your radar, because I'd be interested in tuning in.
People like you that are doing podcasts already. My bandwidth is so limited, and now I have to pick my battles. But I appreciate that. It's a major, it's a wonderful compliment, and very kind of you to say.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming on and for imparting your wisdom with all of our audience. We're all trying to do a little bit every day for our gut health, and it's great to hear from experts like yourself who are at the cutting edge of the field. So thank you so much. If people want to follow your work, learn more about what you do, where do they find you? How do they tap in and benefit from your knowledge?
All the usual social media channels, Blue Sky, LinkedIn. But I also, in addition to that, keep a blog, and that's a blog on my website called Gut Bites. It's gutbites.org. And it's BITES. You could put in Y2 and you'll find me. But it's a resource that I put out there with tons of articles. You'll find the Nutrient Consume Score, which is the calculator, and then also a page about the app. So yeah, that'd be a good starting spot.
Awesome. When your book is out, you can come back on and tell everyone about the book. That'll be cool.
I love it. I look forward to that. This has been a real pleasure, James, and appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Chris.